Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the debut episode of Raising the Visibility. I am your host, Carl Evans. I am the chairman and founder of the Hope for Us Network, and it's my pleasure to be here today. We've got a really exciting experience for you tonight. The Raise the Visibility program is really focused on exploring the intersections of mental health inside of our social context. So this is really focused on trying to explore and unpack the different ways that mental health interacts in our social context and cultural context in communities and among individuals. And to do that, it's important to understand that doing these kind of conversations, we're never going to get through the whole deal. We're talking about very heavy topics, very heavy subtopics, very heavy nuances. And the idea is not that we're going to be the comprehensive omnibus discussion on any one part of these intersections. It's always trying to create an opportunity for discussion where we're taking small bites and exploring things, and we may have to come back and revisit time and time again, just to make sure that we're giving these conversations their just attention. One of the things that's important to understand when it comes to mental health is that there's so many different facets that too often we try to make very broad, generalized approaches. And sometimes it can get tedious because we're afraid to miss out or exclude something. But in the same vein, we miss out opportunities to highlight and to give time and hold space for elements within the dichotomy of understanding and unpacking mental health concepts that could really be beneficial and educational and informational to people who, all of us living in a society where mental health as an educational piece and as general information, we're really starving for. We're really all thirsty for mental health conversations because we don't talk about mental health until it effectively disrupts and blows up in our face. One thing that you'd be familiar with as you sort of look through the Hope for Us Network's content right now is that we spend a lot of time trying to drive home the fact that when we describe we are doing proactive suicide prevention work, we're doing proactive, and that's different because the traditional tools that exist in our traditional approaches to mental health are in fact reactive. And even the effective, necessary tools, the important, essential resources that are out there right now are all based in a lot of concepts that are waiting for people to disclose their mental health challenges. And the fact is that the problems with that is we live in societies that, because of stigma, which is not a buzzword, it's a mechanical reality. There are social and cultural factors that try to shape and dictate how we express ourselves. Stigmas shape how we approach mental health as individuals. It shapes how we engage mental health conversations as a community. It informs and shapes how we create policies and develop practices within institutions on mental health. As you stay engaged with the Hope for Us Network, you're going to learn more and more and see how that's illustrated in very specific ways. We're not just speaking, out into the air, using a bunch of buzzwords to just sort of sound technical and engaged, but we have a very specific blueprint of what is dysfunctional within mental health and what we can do about it. And when we talk about this concept of trying to break concealment culture, that's the term we use for our traditional state of approach to mental health. If you think about wherever you are, it doesn't matter in what cultural, ethnic background, what country you're from, age group, generationally speaking, economically, geographically, we're all living under a shroud of what we call concealment culture. And you can appreciate that yes, it means we hide our mental health. I think that's something we can all readily agree. Yeah, sure. Okay, people hide their mental health from other people. But concealment culture also has the functionality of shaping how we even think of mental health. That mental health is either there's crisis, people who are at imminent risk of taking their own lives, talk about suicide, or mental health is maintenance things that sort of get swallowed up into sort of holistic terminology, talking about yoga and deep breathing exercises in bath bombs, things that can be very beneficial, going for long walks, peaceful music as you go to sleep, things that can be very beneficial to your overall sense of well-being, for sure. And things that are part of the continuum of what we think of as mental health. But we want you to pay attention that there's this really militant bifurcation between the term mental health and how we approach it on a day-to-day basis. For a lot of citizens, not just Americans, but a lot of citizens around the world, if you're not living with something in the realm of a diagnosable illness like depression, bipolar, anxiety, what we call psychological injuries, which is trauma, if you're not living with some sort of diagnosable case like that, then you don't actually have a mental health problem. That mental health is just this tiny little box that's about diagnosis and prescriptions and suicide prevention, and that's that. And anything else is something that's put into the holistic world. Now, for people more engaged in mental health conversations, they understand that there's a bigger spectrum, but even then, the idea of a mental health crisis means someone is at risk of imminently harming themselves. That's what the word crisis means for a lot of people who don't engage mental health conversations regularly, and even professionals, from clinician to volunteers and advocates and lived experience folks, think that's what crisis is. But the fact is that the biggest challenge for effective suicide prevention is this huge gap between the onset of mental health challenges, be they from a genetic basis or from a psychological injury, what we at the network describe as trauma, and the point at which someone is in a state of crisis. But how we want you to understand crisis is that the risk of imminent harm to yourself, to be at risk to take your own life by either suicidal ideation or actually within the physical wherewithal to put a plan in motion, that's part of crisis. But crisis is not exclusively that stage. Crisis can begin long before someone is in the motions of potentially trying to harm themselves, physically harm themselves, mortally harm themselves. Crisis, in the truest sense of mental health and the way we conceal ourselves, is also the point at which someone is unable to conceal their mental health challenges. And I want you to think about that. Mental health crisis is not just exclusively the point at which someone is in physical danger of mortally hurting themselves. Crisis is the moment that someone is unable to conceal their mental health challenges. And if you unpack that and you walk that out and you think about how we navigate and conceal and hide ourselves, if someone is trying to conceal their mental health challenges in their place of business, among their social, personal, intimate relationships, at school, if they're in the military, in law enforcement, in the household, because of the way mental health is so stigmatized, someone could feel that their job could be at risk if their mental challenges are exposed, that they have a diagnosis or that they are struggling with things, be it any form of depression or trauma. Someone's sense of stability then is immediately disrupted if all of a sudden their job stability is harmed. The same thing, think about if you are a student or someone who's in a school environment or any sort of social environment, because of the way mental health is stigmatized and people can have adverse reactions because of the misinformation and lack of understanding and sensitivity on any number of mental health conditions, that could disrupt somebody's social quality of life in a school system or social system. Think about what that means inside of a family context. Think about what that means inside of a relationship, be it among friends or if you're married or dating. These things, not necessarily that the people are going to react adversely, but you have so much fear that somebody is going to act differently towards you, that this creates a sense of crisis. And that's right inside the window that you're not at the point of harming yourself, but your whole world has suddenly become destabilized because your mental health challenges have become exposed. And that is a accurate form of describing a sense of crisis. And why it's important to understand that is because if we're going to be serious about talking about mental health, we need to really dig into understanding its facets and not be generalized. And understanding that mental health crisis is not exclusive to the point at which somebody is about to be in danger of physically or mortally harming themselves. It can also expand our understanding of what it means to be engaged in trying to eliminate the risk factors for crisis, trying to eliminate or enhance our suicide prevention practices. Because if you walk it all out, we know as a fact, if you speak with active duty and veterans of the American military, for instance, the exposure of a mental illness diagnosis, experiences with trauma, can dramatically adversely affect your professional aspirations. It's by stigma, it's by a sense of an inability to do certain performance metrics. You could find yourself out of a job. And if you decided to go career, that is a life-altering, potentially shattering experience to go through. And when we think about the entire echelons of work, whether it's your Fortune 500 corporate experience or you're working in something in a manual labor field, working in the service industry, you could fear, and because of the way we stigmatize mental health is reinforced in so many different communities, you could find your job stability threatened there by an exposure of living with a mental illness, living with different forms of trauma. We have to understand this idea of concealment culture, because how we navigate mental health from the lived experience side, this is manifested in what we do. If you are someone who's living with a diagnosed illness, someone who's living with a psychological injury, traumas, or cohabitating experiences, I say this as a lived experience person myself and a suicide survivor of multiple attempts. I have found in my 20 plus years of working around individuals living with mental health challenges that your day-to-day experience is built on concealing your mental health challenges from others. Part of your survival mechanisms, part of your making it through the day is based on that. And the harder and harder it gets to conceal, the further and further the pains that you might already on a normal day-to-day basis feel, the things that you express when nobody's looking, whether it's the sadness and anger, deep wounds, all these things that you try and hide from everyone else to comply with the illusion of normal, that day-to-day exertion gets painted in such a way that you'll do anything to sort of keep that mask on, because it's a part of your sense of survival, of your sense of trying to function and get through one day to the next. And this is going to be different for every person, but that also brings us to the topic tonight, because what you're going to learn a lot about through Raising the Visibility is understanding how concealment culture impacts almost every waking hour of our lives and every facet of our lives in terms of what we do to sort of comply with a sense of normalcy, the illusion of normalcy, and what we do to conceal our mental health challenges from one another. And that brings us into a topic tonight where you would have seen in our upcoming promotions that we're talking about mental health and substance abuse. And there's a lot of different words, because when we talk about mental health and we talk about these topics like substance abuse, there's stigma even there about understanding, there's stigmas around the entire general word of addiction, the big A word. There is stigmas about certain types of things that would be recognized as substances that could be used. I'm even of the being taught as we go along that using the word abuse, substance abuse, could be stigmatizing in and of itself. There's other terms like substance use disorders. And to understand that a technical description is that substance use disorders are the repeated misuse of an alcohol or a drug, right? These things we know from research, such as there's an organization, if you're not familiar with, called the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, that is typically referred to as SAMHSA in the mental health world. And they do a lot of research on a number of different things, substance abuse and mental health services. So they do all sorts of great research. And they have a national survey. And as of their most recent survey on substance use in America, where people are responding, telling their own stories and truths, like it's a census, we know from the 2019 survey, nearly 9.5 million U.S. citizens reported experiencing both a substance use disorder and a mental illness or trauma, experiencing a trauma. And from all sorts of different forms of research, college institution research, independent agencies, and government agency research, there's an extreme correlation between substance use disorders and mental illnesses and traumas, specifically untreated or undertreated mental illness and psychological injuries. In that very same survey from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, they found a direct, in reported surveys, they made a conclusion that adolescents and adults who used a higher rate of use if they also had a reporting of a mental illness or trauma or a major depressive episode. And that's one survey. And as I mentioned before, there's any number of different types of surveys and research that's short-term research, long-term ongoing studies that connect. But numbers can sometimes be dehumanizing. And I reference that I'm a lived experience suicide attempt survivor. And my experiences, as you will learn more as we go along, are based from intensive childhood psychological injuries. And my attempts happened very early in life. They happened when I was an adolescent. But I didn't magically, with a wand, all of a sudden think happy thoughts and get better. What I did, like so many others, is one of the ways I was able to sort of find stability and navigate day-to-day experiences is that I built up a reliance, very young age, very young, around 12 and 13 years old, to using different substances to I didn't know at the time the words would be called self-medicate, but the drugs I was using helped me go to sleep at night. The drugs I was using took away a lot of the anger and frustrations, and they were things that would follow me from adolescence into teens, into high school, college age level, into my early 20s, into finally going into therapy for my early age traumas, and something that I had to work very hard to let go of. And that's a lucky story, or at least a more privileged story than others who have found other adverse experiences when it comes to using substances. And there may be people who are using who also don't have any history or wouldn't self-report any history of having a diagnosable illness or any sort of trauma. But remember what I said in the very top or start, that mental health isn't just a diagnosis or trauma or suicide prevention or bath bombs and yoga. It's a whole spectrum. And using substances affects our brains, affects our mental health, affects our quality of life just as much. So this conversation isn't exclusively just about someone who's using and also immediately at risk of harming themselves. This is about our general quality of life. And when it comes to things that might be in the collective sense, drugs and alcohol and things like that, that is a very huge industry, billions and billions of dollars. It is a very huge feature and facet of our social, personal, even professional lives. So we have an amazing organization that specializes in confronting the adverse effects of substance use. They're based in Northern Illinois. The organization is called Live4Lali, and we have 3 representatives who are going to tell you a little bit about themselves. But I want to first bring them on screen. As we really just barrel into this topic sort of head first. Let's bring on our guests first. We're going to have Laura. Hello, Laura.
Hi, Carl.
We're going to do, let's have Michelle.
Hi, and thanks for having us.
Luis. There we are. All right. Thank you all for joining us. And I think the first thing we want to do is let's do some introductions. If first we could have Laura, could you tell us just a little bit about Live4Lali first?
We'll start right there. Absolutely. Live4Lali was founded after the 2008 overdose death of Alex Laliberte. And the following month, his mom, Jody Dashman, his sister, Chelsea Laliberte, and dad, Gary Laliberte, decided that they didn't want another family to go through what they were going through. They were blindsided. There was no support in 2008. Nobody was talking about it up here in the northwest suburbs. So that's how Live4Lali was born, in a nutshell.
That's great. Thank you so much. And, for full disclosure, I have the distinct pleasure of knowing Chelsea. We had been high school associates, and it was heartbreaking with the loss of her brother, but it's also been inspiring to see the growth of this organization and the impact it's had. So, Laura, what is your position currently?
I am currently the executive director. I've been in this position, wow, it was a year yesterday. But I've been with the organization for 10 years. I found Chelsea and Live4Lali when I discovered my son's heroin use disorder. And I just was lost because who does heroin? That was my initial thought. And I met Chelsea and fell in love with the organization, started volunteering, and here I am now.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Michelle, thank you for joining us. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to Live4Lali?
Sure. My name is Michelle Kavoris. I'm the programs manager with Live4Lali. I'm not certified in anything yet, but so that I'm not a clinician or anything like that, but I am professional when it comes to lived experience and working with people that just knowing how to talk to people about what they might be going through, because I've experienced it myself, being a person in recovery from trauma and other life circumstances and substance use disorder, to mask the pain of all those things that I dealt with in my life and dealing with. I met Laura about 4.5 years ago at a meeting that she came to speak about, because the overdose deaths, we were losing our friends left and right. And I was like, I need to know her. I need to know her. I need to talk to that person and find out everything she knows, because I wanted to do something to give back and help and stop losing friends. So I volunteered for a while here and there when I could, working 2 other jobs in treatment, and stalked them for a while until they finally hired me. And now I'm blessed to do the work. As heartbreaking as it can be sometimes, when we get the phone calls from people saying, hey, I got a job, I got a girl, I got my own place, I'm doing good, life is great, I just celebrated a year. Like, that keeps us going. But it's a hard battle every day, internally, externally, even within our own organization, because we're all going through this together, and it's, there's just so much work to be done. It's hard to stay focused sometimes, but we support each other, which is amazing. We're a great family, chosen family. So thank you for having us.
Thank you. Luis.
Hello, my name is Luis Aponte. I'm an outreach coordinator with Live4Lali. I was introduced to the program through Michelle. We were we were co-workers at another facility, a theater actually, where they have concerts and all that. So I followed her on Facebook as well, and I would see some of her posts concerning the kind of work she had started doing, and I really was intrigued, for lack of a better term, because I lost my kid's mother in 2015 to a heroin overdose, and as well as a few other family members and many friends. And I'm a person in long-term recovery, and I just wanted to get involved. And so Michelle was my way of starting to get involved, and she's now my program manager.
Well, that's beautiful, and I think a running thread, much like the network, this is very much a lived experience driven organization. And I'm going to speak a little bit out of turn here, and this isn't to stigmatize people who don't necessarily fit the intersection of lived experience, but there's oftentimes an absence historically of people who have had the unfortunate or the fortunate, depending on how you want to look at your resilience, being touched by a sense of the lived experience of actually gone through it, because that shapes, it's one thing to do data research and you've got nice clean facts and figures, but those facts and figures can sometimes miss certain principal elements that you need to understand when you're actually on the street. Mm-hmm. And that's the reality. And there's a lot of spaces in mental health where the street is actually maybe a nice, safe, contained office. But even oftentimes with substance use, there is a place where you have to be out there in the world. And so one of the things I kind of want to talk about, as far as each one of you wants to go, is just what is it to be doing your work, where everyone hears about opioid crisis and we hear things about fentanyl and things like that, but substance abuse has been a historic issue, for a long time. Doing the work in this modern environment, have you found that when you're able to engage people, do you still think there's a sense of stigma around substance abuse, or do you think, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but so Laura, you already reacted, so go on ahead.
Oh my gosh. I see stigma from all areas. Self-stigma that people who have substance use disorder put on themselves. Mm-hmm. I see families stigmatizing their children and their loved ones. I see our court system, our drug courts, stigmatizing people who are trying to get better by using a medication-assisted recovery. Our media, when they use the wrong type of language that continues to stigmatize. When we think about the word